Chapter 12. The click of high heels on tile faded. Walker shifted his shoulders.
Hawthorne, pull a team together. Take officers who've worked here for at least 2 years. No rookies until we find the leak.
Yes, sir. Mathias inwardly cringed. He didn't want this. Not only had Aaron forced him to reveal Jerome's probable location, now he had to lead the police right to him. Gomez blinked.
Chief, you aren't seriously putting him in charge.
Yes, Detective, I am.
The chief slumped into his desk chair.
Hawthorne knows what he's doing, and he spotted this lead.
With all due respect, sir, that's bull...
Walker shot him a sharp look. The detective clamped his mouth shut and flared his nostrils. He controlled his tone with a visible effort.
It's a bad idea, Chief. Who benefited from that email? Hawthorne, that's who.
Heat surged in Mathias's chest. The demon lunged and his control faltered. He caught himself inches from the detective, fists clenched so hard they shook. His voice hissed through gritted teeth. What are you implying, Angel? Gomez drew himself up to his full height.
I'm not implying anything. You told me to drop everything, and when I didn't, you sent the email to Waterman.
Mathias snorted. That's ridiculous. If I wanted to send an anonymous message, I wouldn't plaster my name all over it.
Unless you wanted credit for making me look bad.
A humorless grin stretched Mathias's lips. Oh no, that's all you. Walker slammed his hands down on the desk.
Knock it off. My grandkids behave better than you two. You're both going to the auto shop. You will work together or you're suspended.
The words hit Mathias like a slap across the face. Gomez stepped back, eyes shifting from side to side. The chief didn't make idle threats. Even the demon sensed the danger and quieted. If Mathias got suspended, it would lose its source of prey. Walker stabbed a finger at Mathias.
Collect your team and get over there.
He grabbed a paper from the printer and thrust it at Gomez.
Stop by the court building for Judge Wells's signature on your way. Now get out of my sight.
Subdued, Mathias slouched from the room, Gomez at his heels. They parted without a word. The detective disappeared toward the rear parking lot. Mathias squared his shoulders and headed toward the dispatch office. Time to get this over with. The drab flavor of refrigerated blood lingered in Mathias's mouth. He pulled up to the auto shop and frowned. Gomez's Charger and 2 cruisers flanked the boarded-up building. The stop at his apartment must have taken longer than he thought. If the team had already found Jerome, he shrugged. They'd take him into custody regardless of whether Mathias was there. Blunting the demon's demands had been more important. He grabbed his camera and hopped from the truck. The front door of the business gaped wide, frames splintered where the strike plate had been pried off. A dusty counter stood between the rundown waiting area and 2 open doorways. One revealed a dim garage, the visible concrete cracked and stained with grease and oil. Gomez stood in the other. He glanced behind him as Mathias entered.
Late to your own investigation.
The detective curled his upper lip.
You really take the prize, Hawthorne.
Mathias maintained his distance. Gomez could push his luck with the captain if he wanted. He craned his neck to look past the detective. Based on the old metal desk and filing cabinet, the room had once been an office. He kept his voice neutral. Any sign of Jerome?
Not under the desk.
Sue stood from where she had been crouched, a smile on her face.
We haven't found anything yet, but we only started 10 minutes ago.
Antoine, Mathias's voice came out choked. His throbbing headache, which had eased after the shot of cold blood, returned in force. I didn't see your name on the roster.
I brought her.
Gomez folded his arms.
We needed a CSI, and I'm sure you'll be too busy supervising. Got a problem with that?
Not at all. Mathias managed a shaky smile. Thanks for coming. I need to make sure everyone knows their quadrants. Excuse me. He made it 2 steps before a hand came down on his shoulder.
You're not really in charge, you know.
Gomez spoke in an undertone, his eyes hard.
I'm the lead detective on this case. The chief's decision was nothing but politics.
Mathias jerked his shoulder free of Gomez's grip. Keep your hands to yourself, detective. Gomez's scowl was ugly.
If you want to stay on this case, don't test me.
You're going to kick me off? Mathias smirked. I wonder what Miss Waterman would say about that. The detective's face darkened. Mathias closed his eyes and sighed. Gomez had gotten under his skin despite his promise to himself. He forced his words to take on a reasonable tone. Listen, all I want is to find the girl. I didn't ask for this. Let's just do our jobs. Without waiting for the detective to reply, Mathias ducked into the garage. It was a large, disorganized affair with no marked bays. Afternoon sunlight filtered through high cobwebbed windows to sparkle off dust motes. A mechanic's pit gaped in the floor next to the right wall. An old sedan hunched in one corner, and a truck missing its tires perched on a raised vehicle lift in the middle of the shop. A uniformed officer fumbled in the glove box of the sedan. A second knelt beside the pit, holding a flashlight. His partner's voice echoed from within the hole.
I said to the right, Isaacs. Good. Hold it there.
Hawthorne, there you are.
The final policeman gestured for Mathias to join him. An evidence marker and ruler sat at his feet.
Didn't you find mud at the suspect's house?
Mathias crouched. A familiar brown substance smeared the concrete, overlaying a patch of oil-soaked cat litter. His heart sped up. This was it. Proof Travis's hunch had been correct. Although the auto shop appeared empty now, Jerome had been here. Good work, Jensen. He snapped some photos of the partial boot print. Do you have a sample kit?
Boyd's got one.
Jensen pointed to his partner, who had half climbed into the back seat of the car. Mathias jogged toward the sedan. A faint scent drifted to him. Slowing to a walk, he lifted his chin and sniffed. It came from the car. Blood. The demon sprang to attention. As Mathias neared the vehicle, the smell grew stronger, drawing him to the squared-off trunk. Boyd. He tapped the roof of the car. Can you reach the trunk release?
Sure thing.
She grunted.
Almost. There.
The latch popped. Boyd withdrew from the car, panting.
I'm getting too old for this. I need a desk job.
A ratty blanket covered something large and lumpy. Behind him, Boyd drew in a sharp breath.
Is that...
Mathias reached a gloved hand into the space, pinched one corner of the blanket and flipped it back. Tools tangled with articles of clothing in the bottom of the trunk. Boyd's breath whooshed out of her.
Thank heavens.
Don't thank anyone yet. Mathias shook his head, mouth tight. Do you have a flashlight? The officer unclipped the mag light from her belt and snapped it on.
Oh, my...
She raised her voice to a shout.
Get Gomez in here now.
Blood stained the clothing and blanket a dull brown. The carpet in the trunk was stiff with it. A knife, duct tape, and rope were visible among the detritus. The officers crowded behind Mathias, silent and tense. Gomez shoved his way between them. He stopped short at the scene in the trunk. Animosity set aside, he raised his eyes to Mathias.
This looks too old to belong to the girl.
Mathias nodded once. We won't know how old it is until we test it, but this much blood wouldn't dry out in 24 hours. The detective ran a hand over his hair and swore under his breath.
This is not what we need right now.
He drummed his fingers on the side of the car, then slammed his fist against it.
We've got a new crime scene. Murphy, Isaacs, sweep the property and set up a perimeter. Jensen, Boyd, cover the entrances. I'm calling it in.
The officers sprang into motion. Gomez pulled out his cell phone. A weight settled onto Mathias's shoulders. He popped the lens cap off his camera, lifted it, and snapped pictures of the trunk's interior. For once he agreed with Gomez. This was not what they needed. Processing the scene would take hours, time Vicky didn't have.
What can I help with?
Sue moved to stand at Mathias's elbow and peered into the trunk. She shook her head.
What a mess.
The combination of pungent dried blood and Sue's aroma twisted Mathias's gut. He backed away, his hand flying to adjust his shades. Could you start sorting items from the trunk? I'll do a photo sweep of the garage. She nodded and pulled out some bags. He retreated to the center of the room. Standing beneath the truck on the lift, he took deep, cleansing breaths. Grease and motor oil had never smelled so good. A whiff of something else hit him, and he paused. It was faint, hard to make out beneath the myriad of scents in the garage. More blood. The demon leaped forward. He rubbed his fingers over his forehead. What now? He raised his eyes to the truck above. If he found Vicky's body in there? He strained his senses, blocking out Gomez's short, rapid answers into his phone. A distant pulse throbbed against his eardrums. A heartbeat. Whoever was up there was alive. Mathias narrowed his eyes. So Jerome had holed up here after all. It had to be him. Who else could it be? If he turned Jerome in, Gomez would take over. Odds were good they'd discover him anyway. This was a crime scene, and the team would strip it to the bones. But there was a chance, however small, Mathias might get 2 minutes alone. If he could get close enough to Jerome, he could determine the man's guilt from his scent. He could be patient. 2 minutes was all he'd need. The sun sank in the western sky, lengthening the shadows in the garage. Police came and went. Someone else was always in the room. The auto shop seemed to be cursed for the investigators, throwing one roadblock after another into their path. The shop's electricity had been shut off long ago. The vehicle lift was electric, so the team couldn't lower the truck. When a wrecker arrived to haul away the sedan, they discovered someone had mangled the springs and track on the sectional door. To open the massive door, they would have to dismantle it. Mathias stretched, wincing as vertebrae popped along the length of his spine. He cast a covert glance at the truck. In all that time, it hadn't so much as vibrated. Jerome had stayed as still as a statue.
Quite a day, wasn't it?
Sue's warm, alluring presence sidled up next to him. Mathias stiffened and took a step away from her. He peeled off his gloves with a non-committal grunt. She smiled up at him.
And to think we never would have found any of this if that person hadn't sent Waterman a tip.
He worked his jaw. She was right, but whoever sent that email had done more damage than good. The entire team had been sidetracked from Vicky's case. Without the police force breathing down his neck, he could have dealt with Jerome in a fraction of the time.
Well, aren't you going to thank me?
Mathias glanced sideways at her. For what? A tinkling laugh escaped her lips, and she gestured to the shop. The pieces fell together. Sue. His sight blurred to red behind his glasses, and bitter venom laced his mouth. He whirled toward her. She leaned back, eyes widening. Mathias fought to keep his demon at bay. She had ruined everything. You called in the tip? He hissed the words at her. Do you know how stupid that was? You could be suspended. Actually, that wasn't a bad idea. He glanced in Gomez's direction. All he had to do was tell the detective. He gave his head a slight shake. That wasn't how he did things. Sue brushed his forearm with her fingertips. He jerked away from her, his scowl deepening. Her mouth fell open and she dropped her hand to her side.
I thought it would help. Gomez wouldn't listen to you. You were right this whole time, and he had his head up his...
That doesn't make any difference, Sue. I don't know how things were at your last job, but here, we follow protocol. If we disagree, we do it in the open. He raked his hand through his hair. Gomez is the lead on this case. Undermining him hurts the whole team. You broke everyone's trust. You should be suspended. Her dark eyes shot to his.
Are you going to tell him?
No, but you should. She lifted her chin.
If it wasn't for that tip, we wouldn't have found this crime scene. Whoever was killed in the back of that car deserves justice.
They would have gotten justice. Mathias would have seen to that. He pinched the bridge of his nose. There are better ways to get things done around here. I hope you figure them out. Sue rubbed the back of her neck.
Right. Well, at least I know where you stand. Thank you for not telling.
She brushed against him as she walked away. Her aroma saturated the air, and the demon clawed wildly at her.
You're a good man, Matt.
Yet more evidence of the woman's poor judgment. Mathias folded his arms and leaned against the sedan. Without looking back, Sue collected an armload of evidence. The detective paced in front of the door, his phone to his ear and his face crimson. She dodged him on her way out.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't ignore a murder scene.
Gomez paused, massaging his temple.
Yes, ma'am, I understand. Right away.
He jammed the phone into his pocket and stalked toward the center of the room. Mathias caught his muttered words.
Waterman and her stupid spies. I know what I'm doing.
So Waterman had called. Had Sue tipped her off again? He shook his head. If she had, Mathias wouldn't have to tolerate her sweet blood for much longer. Gomez was taking this personally. The detective raised his voice.
That's it, we're done. We can't finish here until the city restores the power tomorrow.
A tingle raced up Mathias's spine. Those were the words he'd waited to hear all afternoon. The demon hurtled back and forth in his head, compelling him toward the raised truck. It took all his self-control to hold his position.
Dawes, you and Peters are on watch. This is still an active crime scene. No one comes within 500 feet.
Gomez lifted a plastic crate piled high with evidence bags and shoved it at Mathias.
Hawthorne, take this to the station. I want it processed tonight. Tell Meyer testing can wait until the Waterman case is resolved, but it needs to be checked in. Got it?
Yes, sir. Mathias ticked off his next steps in his head. Drop off the evidence, return to the garage. Dawes and Peters would present no problem. The night belonged to him. Drag Jerome from his rat hole and force him to tell where Vicky was. Then, if the fates smiled upon him, he would feed.